So last week, we talked about how to transform our relationship to what's going on in our minds, how to create a little bit of separation between ourselves and our thoughts, our emotions, and our sensations. So we talked about number one, you can shift what the mind is processing, right? So you can intentionally reduce or redirect your attention away from something, away from, say, rumination or worry, towards something more productive or helpful, right? Such as maybe a silver lining, something you're looking forward to, or even something that's regulating, like shifting your attention to your little puppy in the room or your child, playing the piano or doing their homework or even nature, just looking out the window, right? And so changing what the mind is processing is one way. Another way that mindfulness can help transform stress and create some distance there is shifting how the mind is processing what it's processing, right? So shifting from an automatic reaction to a more responsive one. And mindfulness helps us to do that by allowing us to be present with what's happening and not kind of hijacked by automatic reflex, right? And so we can allow something that's unpleasant to be. We can know how we feel about it, and we can maybe get curious about it rather than have aversion, right? And so aversion to what is happening can look like any form of trying to escape, like numbing out with shopping, substances, alcohol, food, even binge watching, right? And scrolling. All these things kind of distract you and take you from the present moment. And when we can shift how we're processing what we're processing to just allow it to be without it having to be better than what it is, right? And so we don't want to run from it. That also can help to shift how we and how our bodies are processing what's uncomfortable, AKA what could be stressful. And then lastly, we can change the view of what is being processed, right? So being able to look at what's happening with a little bit more wisdom, maybe more patience, definitely some kind of foresight, right? Maybe even hindsight. Maybe you've learned some lessons and you're just able to see what's happening and experience what's happening as something that will come and will go. It is not who you are. You don't have to personally identify with the obstacles you might be going through currently, the challenges you might be experiencing. You can reduce your identification with the mental content. It's all thoughts and ideas and impressions and conditionings. And so those are three ways where we can kind of use mindfulness to assist us in how we are responding to stress. But all three mechanisms require us to be present. They require us to have some form of present moment awareness. We need awareness to notice what's happening in real time. We need awareness to allow intentional changes to attention and processing and perspective, like we just talked about. And we, over time, through mindfulness practice, can intentionally build this balanced awareness that allows us to notice both pleasant and unpleasant and even neutral experiences without having to react to them or identify with them as being who we are and who we will always be. We can start to have a more balanced awareness, right? Reducing what is natural to many humans, which is a negativity bias, right? It's built in for safety. But through mindfulness, we can start to really pay closer attention and maybe remove some of that bias and improve our emotional regulation as a result. And so John Kabat-Zinn has a great diagram that really takes us through our stress reaction cycle. And that's actually the name of it, the stress reaction cycle. And you can find it on, if you Google it, you can find it easily. And in this diagram, we can see exactly how mindfulness strengthens our ability to regulate stress and also our capacity to exercise choice, right, in response to stress. So when we take a look at the neuroscience behind mindfulness and 30 years of studies has given us quite a bit of data on just how mindfulness works in helping to reduce stress. And so our brain has many components, one of which is the prefrontal cortex. The PFC is what it's known as. And the PFC is the newest addition or the newest component of our brain that has developed in terms of its evolutionary capacities. And what the prefrontal cortex or the PFC does is it helps to guide our attention. It helps with planning. It controls impulses. It helps us with emotional regulation and our decision making. It's highly plastic and it changes with repeated use, right? So when we talk about brain muscles, the PFC is a huge brain muscle, and it's a great example, right? And so practices that repeatedly bring our attention back to a target help us to strengthen all the networks that are involved with the PFC, which essentially means we're being mindful and attention focusing. So when the PFC is weakened, and what is it weakened by? Chronic stress, trauma, underdevelopment, right? Like in adolescence, just by default, by nature, there's an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. And so there's more impulsive behavior, right? Lack of reflection. And also when we repeatedly empower impulsive or pleasure-seeking behavior that's pretty automatic and reflective or reflexive, then we are weakening the PFC. We're not allowing it to do what it's supposed to do for us. So strengthening the PFC will help to support a more responsive engagement with our experience and also help us to exhibit more intentional behavior. Now, in contrast, there is the OG of the block, right? One of the oldest parts of our brain, which is the limbic system, including the amygdala. And it's evolutionary older than the PFC, and it's wired into the brainstem. And so what the amygdala does is it temporarily inhibits our access to the PFC. Why would anybody want to inhibit our access to the PFC? This thing that's new and supposedly in control of emotional regulation and planning and decision making and impulse control. Why on earth would our body, right, keep us from accessing the PFC? And this was the big shift for me in my practice and my understanding of how stress works and how my agency in working through stress works. When the amygdala stops us from having access to the PFC, it does so for our own good. It does so because it's perceiving what's happening to us as a threat. But it's the oldest part of our brain. So those threats used to be bears, saber-toothed tigers, freezing winters. And our nervous system had to respond in kind to keep us safe. We had to be able to move with the speed of light, quick, lightning fast reflexes, our fight, our flight, our freeze, and our fawn responses to stressful stimuli, to threat. The problem is the limbic system is operating in current day times, contemporary times, right? Where our threats are not necessarily saber-toothed tigers. Now our threats are potential job loss, right? Illness, loss of a loved one. When our system, meaning our nervous system, picks up on these stressful events in our lives, it only seeks to protect us by preventing us from having access to the PFC so that we can respond with almost alchemy, right? Through the nervous system, the hormones, cortisol, etc., adrenaline, all of the psychosomatic functioning that goes on under under our radar, which we're not really conscious of. It all helps to protect us. But when we're not aware of what's happening, that protection might be a bit misplaced, right? And so what happens is when we are we call that like an emotional hijack, actually, because now our brain is responding. It's not, sorry, our brain is reacting, it's not responding. And it's reacting based on chemical impulse and kind of the way our body is reading our environment, our interoception, our neuroception, our exteroception, being able to sense what's happening and make meaning out of it, right? But these brain patterns, they actually contribute to a lot of emotional reactivity. We're lowering our ability to regulate our our emotions and our responses because we don't have access to the PFC, because the amygdala has impeded our access to the PFC, thinking that we're in harm's way. So one of the I think biggest mistakes that people make when they are trying to work through challenge, stress, and adversity is they try to figure things out. But you can't figure things out when actually you don't have access to the figurer outer, which is the PFC, right? And so what ends up happening is we start to have from this inhibition to access the PFC and the increased emotional reactivity that comes from that, we start to create these brain patterns that are actually not a personal failure of ours, but they can be associated with depression and anxiety and excessive worry and rumination, because that's what the limbic system will do without the PFC there to help to control it, to bring some rationalization and some logic into the scenario, to bring some light into maybe the places of the mind that might be a little dark, right? And so that's what the PFC can do. So when that PFC is, it's kind of like, this is where it gets really dubious, because it's not only do you suffer from the results of reduced PFC action, reduced PFC functioning and increased kind of a limbic system, right? Limbic system functioning. What ends up happening is there's an increase in the default mode network activity. And the default mode network, the DMN, is actually what supports self-referential thinking, our internal narrative, or our selfing. And so when that's overactive, which is associated with decreased PFC, we start to have more rumination, more self-evaluation, often more self-criticism and worry. We start to have increased negativity biases, right? And our attention and our memories become more focused on negative information coming in. And the positive or neutral information starts to become more and more filtered out. And so the bias comes early in our sensory processing and outside of our conscious awareness. So we start evaluating and assessing a situation and an environment before our prefrontal cortex or our cognitive brain actually comes online to recognize and understand what's happening. The body is recognizing it and making decisions for us way before our mind is even allowed to have a vote. And so what that means is now it's like a double whammy, because that reinforces in this decreased PFC and increased amygdala activity. And so these changes can be linked to, or these habits can be linked to negative affect and lots of negative mental health states. So this whole idea about changing what the mind is processing, how the mind is processing it, and the view of what is being processed is really all woven up into the way the brain is functioning. What's happening with the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, and the default mode network. So let's take a look at how these ideas, these concepts, the science might actually be manifesting in your own life.